Did you know that Britain actually had the least rationing in Europe? Or that Germany had a unique way of treating its flying aces? Today, I'm going to show you 10 amazing things you didn't know happened in 1939 to 1945. Before the video begins, please give it a like, and if you want to see more, please subscribe to the channel. Now, let's begin. Number 10. Germany's motor transport was minimal. German wartime propaganda that the Third Reich had a highly mechanized and modern army is still widely believed. But actually, in 1939, Germany was one of the least automotive societies in the Western world, despite the Autobahns and Grand Prix victories of Mercedes. On the outbreak of war, there were 47 people for every motor vehicle in Germany. In Britain, that figure was 14. In France, it was 8, and in the USA, it was 4. This meant the German army was largely dependent on railways, horses, and carts, and the feet of its soldiers to get around. There were only 16 mechanized divisions in the army in May 1940. More importantly, however, such comparatively low numbers of motor vehicles meant there were fewer factories, fewer workshops, fewer petrol pumps, and fewer people who knew how to drive. In other words, it was a shortage that could not be easily rectified. Number 9. The American Parsons jacket was designed with comfort in mind. The standard and most widely worn U.S. Army field tunic of the war was the M41, better known as the Parsons jacket. This was introduced in 1941, following trials by the U.S. 5th Division in exercises in the Midwest and Alaska in the summer and autumn of 1940, and was given its name after Major General Parsons, the divisional commander. The design, however, was based on a pre-war civilian wind cheater. The rapidly expanding U.S. Army recognized that most of its recruits were conscripts, and that comfort, durability, and practicality were more important than slick military bearing. With a zip and button front, it was a simple, lightweight, and warm short jacket that required little tailoring and wasted no material, and which was designed in consultation with Esquire magazine's fashion deck. Number 8. The missing Luftwaffe fighter plane. At the same time as Messerschmitt was developing the Bf-109, rival firm Heinkel was also putting forward a new all-metal monoplane fighter, the HE-112. Early prototypes of each were pretty evenly matched in terms of speed and rate of climb, and both the Me-109E, as Messerschmitt's fighter became, and the HE-112E had speeds of more than 350 miles per hour. The latter could climb to 20,000 feet in 10 minutes. More importantly, it had a very sturdy, inwardly retracting undercarriage that made it easy to land for newly trained pilots, and a phenomenal range of some 715 miles, which was even better than the twin-engine Messerschmitt 110. The HE-12 would have been the ideal partner to the Me-109, and its range was an advantage in the Battle of Britain and elsewhere. However, while Willy Messerschmitt was a good party man and Göring had a special and irrational fondness for the Me-110, Heinkel had a whiff of Jewish blood, so the Heinkel fighter was dropped. Number 7. There was a difference between Allied and German fighter aces. The Luftwaffe had an entirely different approach to their aces. Not only were pilots expected to fly on operations longer without breaks, they also actively helped their big shots get big scores with lesser mortals protecting them while the Experten did the shooting. On the Eastern Front, they came up against badly armed and trained Soviet aircraft, and soon the leading pilots began amassing huge scores. Beebe Hartmann was the leading ace of all time with 352 kills. The leading Allied ace of the entire war was RAF ace James "Johnny" Johnson with 38 kills. Number 6. Field Marshal Alexander was the most experienced battlefield commander of the war. Field Marshal Alexander was known to every Briton in the country by the war's end, but he is less well known today. He had an extraordinary career and was the only officer of the war to lead frontline troops at every rank. After rising to acting brigadier in the First World War, he led the Nocera Brigade on the northwest frontier in the 1930s, the 1st Division in France in 1940, and the British forces in Burma in 1942. He commanded Middle East forces and 2 army groups before finally becoming Supreme Allied Commander in the Mediterranean. He was also unique in the British Army for having commanded German troops in Latvia in 1919 to 1920 during the war against Russia. Number 5. Britain had the least rationing in Europe. France and Britain began the war without rationing, and while it was modestly introduced in Britain in January 1940, France had still resisted by the time they were defeated in June 1940. Germany, on the other hand, introduced rationing before the war and struggled to feed its armed forces and the wider population from start to finish. The country's demand for food from occupied territories led to a lot of hunger for a lot of people, including the urban French. British people never had to go hungry, and although a number of foods were rationed, there were lots that were not. Certainly, by 1945, Britain had it very easy compared with the rest of Europe. Number 4. The Japanese had kamikaze rockets. It was not only the Germans who put rocket-powered aircraft into the air in the Second World War. After their initial victories, the Japanese struggled to pace with US and British technology, but they did develop the Oka, or cherry blossom, a rocket-powered, human-guided anti-shipping missile, which was used at the end of the war as a kamikaze weapon. It had to be carried by a mother plane to get within range, then once released, would glide towards the target, usually a ship, before the pilot would fire the rockets and hurtle in at up to 600 miles per hour. Oka pilots were called Jinrai Butai, thunder gods, but only managed to sink 3 Allied ships. It was a lot of effort and sacrifice for not very much. Number 3. Allied merchant shipping losses were just 1%. Allied shipping losses in the Second World War in the North Atlantic, Arctic, and home waters were just 1.48%. Overall, there were 323,090 individual sailings, of which 4,786 were sunk. Of these, 2,562 were British, but on average, there were around 2,000 British ships sailing somewhere around the world on any given day. Convoys, for the most part, were pretty safe, even though a few suffered terribly. Independent sailings and stragglers from convoys suffered the worst, but faster independent sailings were needed to cut down on unloading time and congestion, which was the drawback of the convoy system. Number 2. The priority for manpower in the UK is surprising. Britain had decided before the war began that it would make air and naval power the focus of its fighting capability, and it was only after the fall of France that British powers realized that the army would have to grow substantially too. However, right up until the spring of 1944, the priority for manpower in the UK was not the Navy, RAF, Army, or even the Merchant Navy, but the Ministry of Aircraft Production. In the war, Britain alone built 132,500 aircraft, a staggering achievement, especially when considering that Fighter Command in the Battle of Britain never had more than 750 fighters. Number 1. France had more tanks, guns, and men than Germany in 1940. It is always assumed that during the Second World War, the Germans bludgeoned their way to victory with a highly modern and mechanized army, and air force that was superior to anything the Allies could muster in May 1940. The reality of World War II was very different. On the 10th of May 1940, when the Germans attacked, only 16 of their 135 divisions were mechanized, that is, equipped with motorized transport. The rest depended on horses and carts or feet. France alone had 117 divisions. France also had more guns. Germany had 7,378 artillery pieces, and France, 10,700. It didn't stop there. The Germans could muster 2,439 tanks, while the French had 3,254. most of which were bigger, better armed, and armored than the German panzers. Thank you for watching, and please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and enable post alerts to view more of our future videos.